President Meng, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak to you at this inspirational, truly inspirational conference today. I'd like to apologize, first of all, to the interpreters. Interpreters around the world hate me because I tend to speak rather rapidly, so feel free to bang on the windows if you lose me. So I've been running teams of analysts in the cybercrime field since 1999. Since 2004, I've been working in partnership with law enforcement officers, delegates, friends from the financial services community, and indeed with Interpol people since 2004. And so I'm going to speak to you today about some of the challenges that keep coming up, the recurring themes that keep coming up time and time again in terms of how difficult it can be trying to bring law enforcement and industry generally together to work on this problem. You'll be pleased to hear that I only have 3 slides, and this is one of them. The next one is, let me see, who is this individual? Just shout it out if you know who this is. Mr. T, indeed. B.A. Baracus from a 1980s TV show called The A-Team. Also known as Mr. T. And why am I showing Mr. T? I'm probably the only speaker that will be referencing B.A. Baracus during today's presentations. But as I was coming over here on the plane, I was trying to think of some words that can kind of encapsulate the 8 different areas of challenge that I've thought of. And it occurred to me that every single phrase began with a letter T. So I apologize, this is going to completely not work if English isn't your first language, but we're going to go through some of these challenges now, bear in mind Mr. T. So the first challenge is trust. And it's probably the most important thing that we need to foster and build. And the only real way to build trust is to actually meet. So all credit again to Interpol for coming along and putting this event together. All credit to President Meng. This is the first time in my career that I've actually been at an Interpol event, and the president of Interpol himself has actually been and remained present during the event. So that's of significance. But I can't tell you the number of beers, sakis, palinkas, and vodkas that I've drunk over the years with my friends, and I've seen a number of friendly faces in the room today. You need to meet people to build trust. There's a lot of politics, and we've touched on some of the politics in some of the earlier presentations today, but there's a huge amount of politics and mistrust and misunderstandings, and you break those down by meeting people. The second issue that we have to deal with is tenure. Tenure is the rather annoying habit, certainly amongst law enforcement, and I was 10 years at Scotland Yard, so I'm moderately qualified to speak to this. Once you bring somebody into the IT security field, it's an incredibly complicated area. And you spend 2 or 3 years building up your network of contacts, understanding some of the technology, understanding who the right people are, and just as you get good at it, you have to go back and do something else. And it happens predominantly in law enforcement, but also happens in the industry as well, because people move jobs all the time. The people that I'm dealing with today are the same people that I've been dealing with for decades, but we've all got different business cards. And this is a real problem, especially amongst the IT security community, because there's such a demand for qualified people to work in IT security. I think I saw a stat recently that we need 3 million people over the course of the next decade just to stay on top of the IT security problems we have globally. So people move around all the time, so tenure is a real issue. Traditions. We heard some of the great things that the Americans are doing with the Legal Assistance Treaty program, but we still have fundamentally a very archaic, an 18th century way of combating cybercrime, and it simply doesn't match, it doesn't transfer to a 21st century criminal phenomenon. So the old ways of working are just not going to cut it anymore. And I understand that bureaucracy takes time. I understand that there are rules and regulations. But in my experience, if you have the trust, if you've broken bread with somebody and you actually know that individual, you can pick up the phone and obviously the paperwork will follow. But the requirement, and I'm again inspired by some of the things that the Secretary General mentioned earlier today about Interpol being seen as a platform for very rapid intervention. The traditional way of working really isn't going to work, and we need to start talking about parting ways with that tradition. Training, a perennial problem. The technology changes on a daily basis. It's a huge issue. consistently we found, and Team CYMRU does a lot of community service things. We do a lot of, we do 4 conferences a year. We do a lot of training in the developing world. We'll go into the developing world, we'll train those people up, and then those law enforcement officers, even with a modicum of very basic training, then become very employable in the industry sector. And they'll go and work for a bank, or they'll go and work for somebody in industry. And of course, you lose the training investment that you've made into law enforcement. Tantrums. So tantrums, I have 3 kids under the age of 11, so I'm very familiar with tantrums. Tantrums is what happens when you have a very overtired young kid and they start screaming and pulling their hair out. There are some very intelligent people in the internet security community, very, very gifted people, people that are willing to make a difference. They have not taken a job in Silicon Valley because they want to make a contribution and make a difference. And I'm going to choose my words carefully, and I'm, somewhat of a pseudo-geek, so I'm a little bit qualified to say this. They don't get along with people all the time. And a lot of the time, when you've got people that have been in this business for a long time, working at the cutting edge of cybercrime countermeasures, there is a lot of difference of opinion on the correct way of tackling a problem. And, are we looking at disrupting criminal activity? Are we looking at doing takedowns? Are we looking at working on domain generation algorithms? Are we looking at sinkholing botnets, that kind of stuff? There's a lot of different ways of doing it. What is your objective? Are you looking at putting the bad guy in jail so that they can physically be separated from committing more crime? Are you looking at a deterrent aspect? A lot of the time you have these small trust groups come together to tackle a specific problem, and people don't get along very well. So again, it brings me back to the Secretary General's earlier comments. If you have Interpol as a third-party platform to arbitrate some of these technical disputes, acting as the grown-up, I think that's very much a good way forward. And I touched on it moments ago. Teamwork, and in fact, task forces as well, are essential. I've seen over the course of many years some very successful partnerships, some very successful task forces. I've also seen some absolute disasters. And a lot of it comes down to having people with the right attitude, having people that are willing to take a little bit of a risk and foster some friendship in the interest of taking this forward. So task forces and getting over those trust barriers are absolutely essential, because if you think about it from a criminal perspective, it's all about the risk-reward equation. They want to minimize their risk and maximize their reward, and the odds are very much stacked in their favor. Now, could you turn that around from a law enforcement, investigative, disruptive perspective? Arguably no, but I think that there is a requirement for us to, as a community, take on the fact that we're going to have to take a bit of a risk. We're going to have to start trusting people. There's some great sharing. We heard IBM's X-Force sharing mechanisms. Facebook have done a similar thing. There's a number of different sharing mechanisms that are out there. They haven't been universally embraced by the community. People haven't taken on this idea of we are one team. And I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but at the end of the day, industry can't make arrests, and law enforcement can't do what industry does. Law enforcement simply doesn't have the technology generally or the training ability to do that. So I mentioned technology, but this is actually a bit of a false flag. This isn't a technology problem. This is very much a people problem. The technology is going to change all the time. The only way we're going to combat this is with a people solution. So in closing, my wife is a teacher. She teaches information technology, and she grades her students with 2 grades at the end of every semester, rated A through F. A is the best, and F is for fail. So if I was to grade our community, our collective effort, since 1999 to date, I would give us a B for effort, and I would definitely give us an E at best for achievement. So my call to action, my call to arms, if you like, is to see if we can continue this great start and try and increase those grades. Thank you very much.